our first briefing, one of two, around the capital funding opportunities available. So today we're going to be talking about the DFE, FEE1 and FEEE2W funding, and also some information around the Section 106 funding as well, because they're absolutely linked. So could you move on to the next slide, please, Gary? So just to do some welcome and introductions, I'm Candice McPherson. I'm the Children's Community Development Lead for the South, and I'm going to be talking today about the background of the FEE1 and FEE2 DFE funding, the childcare reforms, and the phase 2 of the funding. Rosemary?
Hi everyone, I'm Rosemary Newell. I'm one of the business management consultants covering Essex. I'm working alongside Candice with the rollout of the capital funding for creation of places for under threes. Diane?
Good morning, Diane Macefield. I'm a Children's Community Development Lead for North Essex, and I'm working on the rollout of Section 106 funding, so I'll be able to talk a little bit about that later on.
Thank you. And we've also got Carrie, our Childcare Reforms Project Support Officer, who will be presenting today. Diane is going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions at all, if you can pop them in the chat, and we'll be picking those up at the end of the session. And also we're going to be putting a Microsoft Forms document in the chat as well, just to, if throughout the session, if you can just click onto that and enter your setting name, and then the PowerPoint and the Q&As can be sent out to you directly once we've completed the session, the final session on Monday. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just a bit of housekeeping. I'm sure you all know this from all the sessions you've attended now, but just if you can keep yourself on mute, it's really helpful. And we are going to be recording this session. I've just noticed a typo on there. We're going to be recording the session. We're going to stop it at the Q&As, but it's actually going external, so we're going to be putting it on our website for any settings that can't attend today. The presentation, as I say, will be sent out to everyone who completes the Microsoft Forms link. If you have any issues with that link, can you let us know, please? And it may be that we just need to put a setting name, etc., into the chat. And as I mentioned before, we're going to cover any Q&As at the end of the session. So if you pop any questions that you have throughout the discussion, and then we'll pick those up at the end. Thank you. Next slide, please, Gary. And the next one. Thank you. So I'm sure you're all well aware of this now. Obviously, you've been living and breathing this every day, but just a really quick overview and reminder of the reforms. So as part of that childcare announcement, with the extended offer around the Funded Early Education Entitlement, we obviously had the extended hours for the term after the child turns 2-year-olds from April 2024 for those eligible working families. And from September, our offer has been extended to the term after 9 months old for those eligible working families. From September 2025, that offer will be extended to 30 hours for children from the term after their 9-month-old until school age for eligible working families. The local authority, as part of the childcare reforms, is also working on around the wraparound provisions. So that's the 8 till 6 breakfast and after school club provision for primary school age children to be in place by September 2026. And that is for schools to offer that provision, but it may be in conjunction with a third party provider offering it on their behalf. So it's not for schools to actually run it themselves, it's just working in partnership with other local providers. The DFE are piloting the scheme to provide an incentive to childminders, so £600 for childminders to set up provision, or £1,200 if they're signing up via a childminder agency. And of course, the revisions to universal credit childcare. So they're paid up front now. Next slide, please. And we've always found this quite a helpful visual, something to share with parents if you haven't already as well. This is the Childcare Choices website visual that they provide. It just breaks down basically the offers and when they will be provided. Next slide, please. So we thought we'd just give you an update on phase 1 of the funding for the FEEE1, so the under 3s capital childcare funding that went out in April. And we received a total of 84 applications for under 3s and wraparound provision. As a result of those applications that have been submitted, we have or plan to create a total of 295 new places countywide, which is fantastic. You know, we've had really good interest in phase 1 and obviously really keen to work with providers to enable that provision to be available countywide as part of the phase 2 project. 876,000 has been allocated for the new fee places for working families as part of that phase 1 from the DFE capital funding for the under 3s. And recent data that we've received, just so you're aware, DFE data has identified that just under 11,000 working families have applied for a funded place in Essex, and 8,000 of those who have found a childcare place. So that's that take-up rate of 73%, and we are exceeding the national average on those figures. Next slide, please, Carrie. So just going to go over the additional kind of a bit of a background of the supply and demand analysis and how we've come to the conclusion of where we need to advertise the funding for phase 2 as part of the DFE initiative. So to determine how many places we need to meet the requirements, the following data sets we've considered and really looked over and reviewed to come to that conclusion. So you will all be aware that we've had our excuse me, our recent summer 2024 childcare sufficiency data. So thank you for completing that. That's really helped us and enabled us to understand where there is still a need for additional provision. We always use that, so the data is so helpful for us to consult with local districts, and this is an example of when, you know, the importance of that data is enabled us to do that scoping and understand where that provision is needed. We've looked at the Ofsted data on any recent opening and closed provisions, so we've obviously that's enabled us to understand if there's a need for provision based on maybe there's, you know, several that have closed, and then obviously we think about the reason for the closing. So it may be that they've closed because there are a surplus of places in the area, and then we feel that there's not a need for additional provision. Insight gathered from take-up of new entitlements across Essex. So we've looked at the amount of places that have been offered as part of that phase 1. And also the settings that we spoke to that we're aware have opened during that time as well, and that have met some of that need that we've been looking at. The numbers of children that are switched to a funded FEE2 place, so we've been able to look at the families that we know were already accessing a place, and that's just gone across basically to the funded place. So that's what we classed as a switched place. We've also looked at the availability of Section 106 funding, so that funding from local housing developments, and where that will already meet the need for provision. So Diane is going to talk a bit more about that later in the presentation. And also the knowledge of future housing developments and insight from the local district plans. So just taking that into account when we've been doing that mapping of where provision is needed and funding needs to be allocated for phase 2. Thank you, Gary. Next slide. So just to talk about that in a bit more detail, really. So following all of that analysis, it's enabled us to identify where there needs to be additional places for provision going forward, and that's what we've taken into account for our phase 2 project, which will go live week commencing the 9th of September, so hopefully next Monday. So we've taken into account those section 106 pots that we've already received, which we will be advertising towards the end of September. And as I say, my colleague Diane will talk a bit more about that. So where we felt where there are already section 106 pots, and because of the limited amount of funding that we have, that we would not advertise the DFE FEEE1W funding in those areas, because that funding is already meeting the need, and unless there are extenuating circumstances. So we have really focused on those other areas where we know that there's priority based on our childcare sufficiency data and any local intelligence that we have. So based on this, we've used a very similar model to what we did in phase 1 for those that aren't aware or may not have been applied for phase 1. We looked at the places that were needed county-wide, and based on the funding we had available, it equated to approximately 3,500 per place. And last time we were very specific in our specifications per district on how many places a provider could apply for per ward. So if they fell in, for example, Wickford Castledon ward, and it said a certain amount of places, they could only apply for that. So, for example, 3 places equated to 10,500, and it may have been that they met the need for other wards as well that had that funding associated to them, so they could apply for that, all of the pots together, basically. So we've taken a bit of a different approach this time, although we've still looked at the wards in terms of need. We're putting it out in a different process this time. So basically we're saying that applications that we are going to receive can apply for a minimum of 3 places. So that's 10,500, and that's because our capital, internal capital element means that any capital funding has to be over 10,000. So we've capped that at 3 places, and a maximum of 32 places, and we base that on what we feel in terms of a 56 place nursery covers those 1 and 2 year old provision. So that equates to 112,000. Next slide, please. So we'll discuss this further later in the presentation, but all of the further information on this will be advertised on our website, and we'll cover, you know, a bit more guidance around, you know, specific information on that specification, following guidance documents, an overview of those priority wards or priority areas to understand if you will be eligible. But we'll discuss that a bit more further in the presentation. So this is just the timeline. So the application goes live next week, hopefully the 9th of September. We're just taking that through internally with our web team to try and get that live for Monday. The application closes on the 31st of October at 5 p.m. This is a shorter time frame than we would usually advertise our section 106 funding for, but we've been given specific timelines by the DFE that the funding places must be available by the summer term, and that's something to consider when you're looking at your project. And it will take time internally once that's closed to go to panel for visits to be undertaken for internal governance, so that's just something for consideration. Your last request for our business management consultant support will be on the 17th of October. So that is Rosemary and her equivalent colleagues across the county. And the reason that we put a date on that is previously our BMC colleagues have received a lot of inquiries the day before it's closed, and then they feel that they just can't offer that support that's actually needed. So we've made sure that we've put that final request date on there. The 12th of December will be the moderation panels for recommendations. So a group of colleagues will sit around and review the applications, and we've made the decision this time to review them initially, and then after that point a quality assurance visit will take place once we've shortlisted those applications. So if the panel endorses your application, you will then receive a quality visit with our Equality Inclusion Officer and our early years education partner colleagues to come to your setting and have those discussions with you a bit further in terms of that practice and what you're looking to do as a project. And those are those dates for your diary, basically, just to put aside if that's something that you would like to do. Next slide, please. So I've just realised that this looks really tiny on the slideshow, but just so you're aware, because we had a couple of comments in the phase one of the funding, just where all the documents were. So on our website, there's specifically a section under the funding tile that takes you to the FEE1 and FEE2 information. I couldn't put obviously all the resources on there because it's not live yet, but just so you're when you actually go on that web page, if you scroll down towards the bottom, there will be a list of resources such as the application, the guidance, the priority link, etc. That will all be at the bottom. So I think there was just a bit of confusion where that was. We will of course send out comms with the link to the website, and when you receive the presentation, the links at the bottom there as well. But just to highlight that, just so you're aware. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to talk you briefly through the specification. So in phase one, for those that are aware, we had one specification per district. We've made the decision to just have one county-wide specification now. So it just gives an overview of the total funding available and, of course, the key dates that you need to consider when placing this application. Next slide, please. Again, a bit small. It's quite difficult to see there, but this this document have a look through this. It's so important that you look through these documents before making that application. It just outlines eligibility. So talks about, again, those 3 places, the maximum of 32 places. You can apply if you are based within the ward. When you go into the documents available, we have, which I'll show you in a minute, we have a priority area document, and basically you can type in your postcode and it will let you know if you are in priority 1, 2 or 3. Next slide, please. So just to talk through what that means in a bit more detail. So we have highlighted a priority 1 group as highest demand, or the shortage of places for those working families who are eligible for the FEE1 and 2. So when looking at that childcare sufficiency data, really just overlaying all the other information we have and saying, okay, there's a real shortage of places for those families, and that's where the funding needs to be prioritised. The priority 2 is that we are demonstrating some need for additional places who are eligible for FEE1 and 2 provision, and we'll really need to see that demonstrated in the application that you feel that there's a demand for provision in your area. And then we've classed priority 3 as either no identified need for additional places, or that there is section 106 allocated to the area. So as I mentioned briefly earlier in the presentation, if there is section 106 available in your area, we have made the decision not to advertise the DFE funding because of the limited funding that we have, we're going to focus on those other priority areas. So when you're postcode searching, you're setting that you're looking to either start or expand places within. It will give you the overview of what priority group you're based in. We're going to be, when we're reviewing applications, we're going to prioritise those 1 and 2 priority applications. So they'll be reviewed first. Any applications in priority 3 areas will only be reviewed if there is any capital funding remaining in January. So the timeline process, once we have closed applications and gone through panel and undertaken the QA visits, we then need to undertake that internal governance, which will mean we won't really have that understanding of what we have left until January, and that is when we will review any priority 3 applications that have come in. So just to clarify, you can apply if you are in a priority 3 group, that's okay, but we will be looking at those priority 1 and 2 groups first. Next slide, please. And this is just to give you a screenshot of our very whizzy priority area tool that our data team has put together for us, and it's a fantastic, hopefully easy to use tool for you, and will be on a link within the resources that I showed you on the Early Years website. So basically you can enter your postcode, just make sure you don't put any spaces, enter your postcode, and then it will give a tick box underneath, and then it will basically highlight which priority group you fall within. So it'll tell you your ward and your priority. You can also just hover over the map and look at all of the different wards, and it will highlight what priority they are. You can see that the reds are the priority 1s. So it just gives you an overview of those real areas of need. The ambers are the priority 2s and the green are the priority 3s. There's also a separate tab on that sheet that you can go down to district level, so you can actually look at all of the other wards within your area, and if you feel that even though you're in a priority 3, you can demonstrate that you're meeting the need of those other families in your application, that's also something to consider when you're looking through the priority document. Next slide, please. Just to clarify, all of these documents, including the priority tool, will be live from Monday. So we're just going through the process with our team at the moment to get those all uploaded. It takes a couple of days. Okay. Rosemary? No, sorry, Diane.
No,
pass
me.
over to Diane. Thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to just give a very brief overview of Section 106 funding. I'm sure everybody is aware of funding, but just as a refresher. So this is money that is secured by the County Council from housing developers, and the money is given to us as a contribution towards the development of local infrastructure. So as a local authority, we're consulted on things like highways, schools, and early years. So where we use all the data that Candice has already talked about, we request money for early years through that process. The Section 106 funding is then negotiated with the developer, and there's an agreement put in place, and that agreement is completely out of our control. We make a request for how we want that worded, but once the agreement is in place, the terms of that agreement are legally binding, and we don't have any option to sort of flex that. So some of them will say that it's within a ward, some of them will say it's within a 3-mile radius of the development. So just to point that out, really, that's what the funding comes with. The terms is what the funding comes with. So it is capital funding. So anything that if you pick your building up and shake it, it doesn't fall off is what we how we define capital funding. It's the structure of the building or fixed assets. Exactly the same as the DfE expansion grant funding. However, requirements are slightly different for 106, which means that the application process is also slightly different. All of the details are available in the application pack, and it's we've tried to make it flow as well as it can, just to make the whole application process easier. We're learning from each round and we're trying to make it easier and less onerous. So whereas there is one generic service specification for the DFE funding, for Section 106 funding, every pot of funding that we advertise has got its own service spec. And I'd really urge everybody who's thinking of looking for 106 funding to go through the service spec, because this very much details how much funding is available for each pot, where it can be spent. And as I've just said, that might be in the ward, it might be in a 3-mile radius of a particular postcode, it might be to serve a particular postcode. So that will, again, in the application, much like the DFE, you'll need to provide evidence how you're going to support families living in a new housing development, and it will tell you what it can be spent on. So the 106 agreement comes with an age range, and in the service spec, we will say whether we're particularly in need of, always in need of fee places, particularly now for our working families, to support our working families, a flexible offer of fee, wraparound childcare, and that will all be in the service spec. So for each pot, it will look different. So we just say, please look and make sure that you can meet the requirements of the service spec. The other difference is between opening opportunities and closing opportunities. There's a 12-week time frame for applications, and that's because generally 106 pots of funding are higher. We have some, sort of quite significant pots of funding, and that means that the building projects could be more complex, so more requirement for better defined drawings, architects' drawings, planning applications, things like that. So there's a longer window to submit your application, but throughout that 12-week window, access to BMC support, so Rosemary and her colleagues, access to our support as sort of their local knowledge, and any other support that you might be looking for. And as I've said, support and guidance is available for providers considering submitting. So, we're keen to, because we know what a process it is, and it is timely, and it is a big commitment to make an application, that we'd rather talk to you early on to support with those early stages of thinking. Thanks, Kerry. So for, again, very little text here, but for autumn 10-14, that should be 2014. I've just seen a typo there. Our opportunities are going to be launched on Monday the 30th of September, and they'll be closing on Friday the 20th of September. We've staggered it a little bit because we needed to make that sort of definition between the reforms funding and 106. 10-14, that's quite funny. So at the moment, we have pulled together a list, again based on the information that Candice was talking about, of where we have Section 106 available and where we know we have a need. That list at the moment is with our planning team and with our finance team, and we're waiting for clarification. But potentially there's going to be funding available in Braintree Central, Braintree West, Bocking, Hatfield, Peveril, in Braintree District. Then for Epping Forest, there's Waltham Abbey. In Uttlesford, we've got Saffron Walden. In Brentwood, there's Herongate. In Rochford, there's Roche South. In Colchester, we've got Shrub End and Wivenhoe. And in Tendring, we've got Kirby, Lawford, Brightlingsea and Canhall. So that at the moment is what we are hoping to be able to offer out in September, but we are waiting for confirmation. So if you are in one of those areas and are thinking about what pot you can apply for, just keep an eye out, and we will get that information out as soon as we possibly can. But it will certainly all be on the website on the 30th September. And all applications that are progressing will require a monitoring visit by our early years education partner and our equality and inclusion officer. So obviously quality is paramount for all funding applications, but that is part of the Section 106 application. So I think I've covered everything I want to say specifically, but obviously happy to take any questions at the end of this session for any specifics. Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you. It's now on to me. So returning back to specifically looking at what potentially you could consider as a project if you're thinking about submitting a bid for funding for under threes capital. So I think there are some considerations and points that we want to raise now for you to think about. You need to think, do you have sufficient information to submit alongside the application? When the application process goes live on Monday, you will see that there will be a list of documents that need to be submitted, and we will talk about those a little bit later in the presentation. And so part of the application requires you to submit a range of different supporting documents. So first consideration is, does the timescale involved give you the time to pull those documents together? Because we appreciate for some of you might have all of this already there, and in which case the answer is yes, you have enough time and enough capacity to do that. But if you're at the very, very early stages of just thinking about what you could do around a capital build project, you might not be at the stage where you have all the information that we would be requesting from you. And linking in with that, again, it's the timescales involved. So the expectation from Department for Education is that the new childcare places will be available at some point in the summer term 2025. So thinking through the timescales that we've outlined to you today, decisions are likely to be made in January 2025. So potentially then a project would need to be completed within 4 to 5 months at the most. So that in itself might focus what type of building works or what type of projects could be done within that time scale. And linking with that is the consideration of whether any planning consents or planning permissions would be required, or whether you know that you would need to receive written permissions from the freeholder, for example. So if some of those things are already in place, then you know that that would not impact upon your timescales. But if, for example, you realise that you did need to submit a planning application, because that is a 12-week window, a 12-week timescale as a minimum, you might need to consider then what impact that might have on your ability to have the project completed and the places ready in the summer term. We've set out earlier in the presentation how much money is available per place. So the funding available is £3,500 per place, and we're funding up to approximately 30 places. So within that, then that then gives you a potential total amount of money that might be able to be bid for. But considering, would your project actually cost more than that? If the project would cost more than the funding that is available, part of the application process does ask you to specify whether that additional funding is coming from. It could be through personal investment, it could be through other grant funding, but there is an expectation that you're able to state that that you've identified that funding and you know that that funding is available. And one key thing is when you've been thinking about the timescales and the information that's required, thinking about ultimately, do you have the capacity to deliver the project within the timescales and within the funding that is required? And these are all these project considerations that we're flagging up now are part of a conversation that a business management consultant is happy to have with you if you did. If you have seen where the priority areas are, where they're released next week, and you feel that yes, you would like to proceed, but you do have some questions around potentially your capacity or potentially the depth of information required, that is something that we can advise and support you on. So do draw on our support that we can offer you, because there are a lot of considerations for you to go through to get to the point of thinking, yes, actually we can pull all this information together and we can submit a bid, and we would be able to deliver on what we are bidding for. Another thing, just because it does impact upon timescales, is the intended works that you are going to do, whether what impact it would potentially have on your Ofsted registration, and that's purely partly around timescales. If it required a new registration, so say for example you were looking at creating a new provision, then we're aware that Ofsted do give guidance that the lead-in time for a new registration is 26 weeks, which is around about 6 months. Sometimes it is shorter than that, but again, it just then helps you to consider the timescales that are involved and whether that would sit within the timescales that we have for this funding. Next slide, please, Carrie. Thank you. Diane's already touched on what capital funding can be used for. So the definition, as we've already said, is that capital funding is something that goes into the material of the building, something that would not fall out if you took the building upside down. So we cannot cover furnitures, play resources, equipment, furniture, office furniture, etc. But what it can cover is the costs of building works, which might be remodelling an internal space. So it could be that you think that the arrangement of the rooms within your setting, if a wall could be moved, or if an existing toilet area could be knocked down and moved or enlarged, that it might then give you the capacity for more children. So it's thinking about what can be done internally. So it could be an extension on your existing building. It could be creating an additional space, whether it's a physical extension or whether it's perhaps a smaller building within your premises, so perhaps in your garden. We want to just be really clear that these opportunities are open for childminders, the same that they are for group-based settings. So we will consider building works that could potentially be converting a garage into a dedicated play space. It could be putting a log cabin type structure within your garden, which would then give you additional places. So it's any works that would be required in order to create the new places. As long as these places, as we said, are going to specifically be for FEEE1W and FEEE2W places, because the funding coming through from DFE is specifically to meet the increased need because of the working entitlements that are being rolled out for families. Next slide, please. Thank you. So all of the information that goes live next week will give you the application pack, and it will give you the list of all the documents that need to be submitted. So we've provided the information here for you as well. So there are forms that need to be completed. So there's an application form. Now these all of the forms are Word forms, with the exception of the cash flow, which is an Excel spreadsheet. They will all be available for you to download, and then you complete them as Word documents. And then in order to submit your application, you send all of the requested documents by an email to our team, and we'll go through that later on in the presentation. But just to say that these forms are for you to complete. There will be a checklist for you to go through at the end. So just before you submit, you make sure that you are submitting all the documents that are requested. The supporting evidence documents are really important because they are really going to give the greater depth of information, and also help us to ensure that you are meeting some of the legal requirements as well. So for example, a freeholder consent form is really important, so that we know that your planned building works are going to be done with the consent of the people that own the building, if it's not yourself. There are other documents that we say that need to be attached. So it could be for example, policies. So they're your own policies that you already have within your setting. So for example, we asked to see a fee policy and a safeguarding policy. With the business plan and cash flow forecast, we do need those. We do have template documents if you wish to use the templates, so they will be available online. So if you wish to use our version of the templates and you complete it with your information, you're more than welcome to do that, or you can submit your own versions, but there must be a completed business plan and cash flow submitted, along with a document that will evidence your legal status. So for example, it could be a certificate of incorporation if you are a company limited by guarantee. It could be your memorandums and articles, or your constitution if you're a charity or a voluntary organisation. But if you're not sure about that when you're submitting your application, again, please do come back to us and we will help you. If there's any supporting evidence that you're not clear on, we can support you with that. It is really important that you do submit certain documents using the templates provided. So we've got one which is a project concept form, and we refer to it as an FEEE1W form, and that is required for our infrastructure delivery colleagues to be able to get some initial information on what your planned building project is. And then the earliest quality assurance form, again, that is to assist through the sifting process and the marking process of your bids, because there will be a quality visit. So the quality assurance form helps by providing our panel members with information relating to the quality of your setting. Next slide, please. I will say that the application pack that we've put together here is very similar to what was in the phase 1, but the main difference is the phase 1 application process was done completing an online form. So you went through our website and completed the form online. This time the form is a downloadable Word document which you complete and then you email back to us. A number of the supporting documents are exactly the same. So the freeholder consent form, the requirement to submit your fee policy, your safeguarding policy, the EY bid 1 form, all of that remains as it was. But there is one of the slight differences is that in phase 1 there were questions about quality within the application form because quality assurance visits weren't undertaken, whereas this time you complete the quality assurance visit form, but there are no direct questions around the quality of your provision within the application form. So there are some differences, but ultimately we are still requesting the same information, but the layout of the forms looks different. So when you're completing the application forms, like I said, we've gone through the timescales already, and to say that all documents do need to be submitted, and it will need to be submitted by email or within one email. And that the instructions for that will be clearly laid out within the guidance documents that we've provided. And our deadline is a set deadline, so any applications that are received after the deadline will not be considered. We are encouraging people that if your application is completed before the deadline, that you could submit it before the deadline. Because if you do that, then if you do realise then that you have not submitted all the requested documents, you will then still have until the deadline to submit the documents required. So our first sift, once the deadline passes, will be to check that everyone that's applied has sent in all the documents on the checklist that's required. Any bids that have not submitted all of the requested information will be declined at that time. And we are requesting, because we are asking for a lot of documents to be attached, and obviously we'll be receiving bids from a large number of people, that the documents are named in a specific way. And again, that's why it's really important to read through the guidance documents that we will be providing and will be on the website, because that specifies how to name the documents. It's very straightforward. It's literally setting name, document name, but it's just to avoid anything being attached that might be labelled as a JPEG or might be labelled with something that we can't clearly identify to your setting. So we just need to make sure that all documents are named and really clearly linked to you. Just say that when you are completing the application form itself, you will see we do have set questions, and each question does have a word limit. So what we are doing with those word limits is when the documents are the application forms are first being reviewed, we will look at the responses, and any words after that word limit is reached will be discounted. So we do encourage you to work to the word limit, and some of the answers you will find that you'll be giving an overview, you want to get your message across, but the information then like you could refer to your business plan, for example, where you might give some more in-depth information that is required. And as I said, do make use of the support available through your business management consultant, certainly around when you're pulling together or updating your current business plan, because we appreciate that a lot of you might have business plans already, but you might consider tweaking it to make it specific to this bid, to this project. And for those of you that perhaps don't have a business plan already, again, we can work with you to help you pull your business plan together, because you might be pulling it together specifically for this, but then you might also be considering using this as a starting point to have a more general business plan. But we do ask that your business plan and your cash flow are for the whole of your business, because we need to see how your business is operating currently, if you are a current provider, and then what the new places will do for the business, because we need to see, for example, the cash flow will show the financial picture before the places are created, and then how you and how the new places would impact on the income and the expenditure of your business, so that the panel can take a view on the longer term sustainability of the business if you then extend to take more children. So we do ask that the business plan and cash flow refers to the business, the setting as a whole, because if you're talking about what your business is currently and what it will become if it receives the funding and it increases the number of places. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, just wanted to give just a little bit of general information around what makes successful bids, because a number of us have supported providers through the first phase of the capital funding, but also with previous 106 funding rounds as well. And we do find that the first thing is, of course, for your bid to proceed, is to make sure that all the forms that are requested as a part of the application are completed. We do say, please read through the service specification and be really clear then that when you're completing certain questions on the application form, such as question 1, which is about the offer, that you're referring to, that you make sure that it references closely what the service specification is asking for. So if there's a specific number of places that are being requested to be created, then you make reference to that. If it's a specific area that you're focusing on, that you make reference to that, so that you can be very clear to say, this is who we are, this is where we are, this is the places that we want to create, and this is why we know the places are needed. So the application form really is going to be looked at for 2 purposes. So it's being looked at for the first purpose of, can the building project be achieved with the timescale involved and with the funding involved, and given the information that you would have provided around a mobilisation, the potential new staffing structure, the actual project of works and the building programme. And then the other part that's looked at is when the places are delivered, so when the new places are available, how quickly will they be taken up? How much demand do you feel you'll have for those places? How will those new places help your business be sustainable? So that we then have a clear vision, or we have a clear view of what your vision is for your business and how the funding is going to expand and improve your business. And that, again, the creation of places is not potentially going to jeopardise your business, but that it's going to support your business and help your business to grow and become or remain sustainable. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of the presentation. So we just wanted to again highlight that there is support available for you through the business management consultants. As Candice referenced earlier, we have put I won't say a deadline, but a date for last request for support from the business management team. That is purely, as Candice said, really to avoid us being in a situation of not being able to support you if you request support the day before the submission deadline, for example. So we are very happy to work with you up until the week before or the week of the deadline, but we do request that you make contact with us before the 17th of October, so that we have at least a week, if not a fortnight, to provide you with support. But of course, the earlier the better. What we're asking is that when the information goes live next week, that you read through the service spec, you understand what priority area you're in, and you have those initial thoughts about what your building project could be, and then you come to us and we can provide you with the support to work on your application. As I'm sure you're aware, we do have a team of early years education partners working across Essex, and if you have questions around potentially rezoning areas within your provision, or thinking about if you're thinking about lowering your age range to take younger children, your early years education partner could help talk you through the practicalities of delivering the UIFS perhaps to a different age group, or with a different layout within your setting. So do draw on their support as well. Next slide, please. And then our team of children's community development leads, so Diane and Candice, who are on the call today, as well as Vicky and Susie, are available to talk to you if you have any specific questions or queries around the priority areas and around where are the particular needs in the areas, and helping you to perhaps interpret some of our sufficiency data as well. One key thing that I do want to flag up is just because it's on this slide. I've talked about the application pack. The application forms need to be returned to an email address. So the childcare expansion email address is where is the inbox that's being used to receive all the submitted applications. So when you're submitting your application, you need to use that email address. Again, that is all that information, and that the link to the inbox is on our Early Years and Childcare website. So if you follow the link in this presentation, or you go onto the Essex Early Years website, you will find under the funding pages, all the information will be uploaded. It will go live on Monday with all of the information, the guidance documents and the forms that you require. Okay, next slide, please. So
Sorry, Rosemary, can I just add to the end of that quickly?
Sure.
Just to add, and I know it was briefly raised on a slide, but just to really highlight, please read through all of the documentation before you contact us for extra support, because a lot of the information will be captured on these to read through, to understand, but also obviously for capacity reasons as well. You know, there's only a certain amount of us, so we really appreciate you just to read through all of that guidance that we issue first, and then of course if you need any extra support, we're here for you.
Okay, so that brings to a close the end of the presentation that we wanted to complete today. What we're going to do, we're going to end the recording of this session, and then we will begin the questions and answer session.
Okay, shall I